a published writer, an avid gardener. She's ever curious, asks lots of questions, as you know. She's a great companion on our walks. My friend, Martha Woodroof. Kick it off, Martha.
Yay! Yay! And I would like to mention I am the guinea pig to start a new OASIS series where writers are going to write. My talk is very anecdotal and informal, but writers or people are going to tell stories or read something they've written. And the name of the series is Stories on 2 Feet. Okay. Here I go, and I'm going to be reading, and I also should warn you, I cough. It's a delightful combination of allergies and lung cancer. So, I have hot tea here, but, if I just zoom out of sight and you hear this horrible roaring going on, just wait a minute, okay? It'll end, all right? The name of my anecdotal offering is Stumbling Blind in the Right Direction, or How I First Came to Freelance for NPR back in the 80s. I'm old, and over the decades, I've had a lot of fun earning a living. Looking back, I can see that I got to do what I wanted to do professionally because, pretty much from the get-go, I wasn't shy about asking to do it. My theory is that we're all stories on 2 feet. So rather than lecture you on the value of parking shyness in the professional arena, I'm going to offer 2 snippets of my own story that kind of sort of illustrate what I'm talking about. Snippet number 1. What I learned from my brilliant movie career that wasn't. I was 22, living in Houston and appearing in a really weird play called Fire, when movie director Robert Altman came to town. There's some kind of a feedback or other.
Yeah, maybe I'll mute everybody while you're reading.
Whatever. Okay.
Okay. See if that works better.
I was 22, living in Houston and appearing in a really weird play called Fire when movie director Robert Altman came to town. He just made a big splash with MASH and had come to Houston to film Brewster McCloud, a now mostly forgotten movie that was now mostly forgotten actor Shelley Duvall's debut. Rumor had it, Mr. Altman had plucked her from behind the cosmetics counter at Foley's department store. Well, I thought, why should he not pluck me as well? I'd blown breathlessly into Houston at 19, worked as a waitress and a Houston Post researcher, made friends at coffee shops and peace rallies, married a Rice University student, had a child, decided I was an actor. In those days, I confused patience with entropy and was driven by a burning urgency to be something before life, meaning my 20s, passed me by. What mattered most, the standard to which I held myself strictly accountable, was that I not do something out of fear. That afternoon, while my 2-year-old daughter napped, I wrote a letter that began, and this is the truth. Dear Robert Altman, I would like to be your new star. There was more, but that was the gist of it. I put the letter in an envelope along with my headshot, a few candid, some reviews. Once young Lizzie was awake, I loaded her onto the back of our bicycle and pedaled off to hand deliver my letter to the Warwick Hotel, where the director and his entourage were staying. I entrusted the envelope to the Warwick's concierge and pedaled away. The next day, again during Lizzie's nap time, the phone rang. It was Robert Altman inviting me to a party. I remember a frisson of panic. Maybe this particular asking to do a new thing had been supposed to end with delivering the letter. Besides, Wasn't I 5 pounds too fat for any kind of official viewing? I worried about those things in that days. And what on earth would I wear? I'm in a show, I said, buying time, possibly hoping for a reprieve. So am I, Mr. Altman said. So we'll start early. Come around 6 before your theater call. The director's suite in the Warwick was smoky. People said there were drugs everywhere around this man. But how was I to tell? I drank cheap wine and smoked a little dope. Beyond that, experience ended and affectation of experience began. Altman wasted no time in coming over, shaking my hand, looking me up and down, asking me if I'd like to come to Minnesota and make a movie. There it was, my brilliant movie career unfolding. Here was a ticket to Hollywood by way of Minnesota. McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Martha. Had I really just been offered a part in a movie? But I have a child, I said. Altman was very kind. So do I, he said, several as a matter of fact. You have to choose what you want, Martha. Will you come to Minnesota and make a movie with me, or stay here with your child? You may call me tomorrow with your decision. In the end, I couldn't leave my daughter. So McCabe and Mrs. Miller remained McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I did, however, learn a valuable lesson from my near miss with superstardom. It's okay to ask anybody to let you do anything. All they can do is ignore your request or say no, and occasionally they will say yes. End of snippet number 1. Snippet number 2. My graceless initial contact with NPR, or how I learned to learn from rejection. Around 1970, I auditioned to host NBC 29's morning talk show, Charlottesville Today. I resolved to audition after my second ex-husband pointed out that, as I had no broadcasting experience, I would never get the job. Second ex, by the way, is extremely nice, just so not adventurous. As it turned out, you don't need experience to get hired as the host of a small market TV talk show. What you do need is the ability to be comfortable in front of a camera, which I had. I didn't much like television. I had to fuss with my hair and wear big lady clothes. But I loved the excuse being on TV gave me to talk to people I'd never otherwise get to talk to. And so it was during my stint as host of Charlottesville Today that I flat out fell in love with other people's stories. It wasn't until the late 80s that I accidentally backed into radio. How I got there is another snippet that I'm happy to relate during the Q&A if anybody's interested. But what's important to this snippet is that radio feature reporting had everything I loved about television, access to other people's stories, without any of the production drawbacks. TV is burdened with lurking cameras and other people standing around in very bright lights and me sitting up there all dolled up with perfect hair and makeup, all of which tends to make non-celebrities, as opposed to politicians and movie stars, nervous and self-critical and shy. And so not nearly as relaxed and forthcoming as they might have been in a more low-key situation. Whereas in radio, it's just me in jeans and a t-shirt, one tiny recorder and a microphone that's forgotten as soon as the conversation gets rolling. Off I shot into the magic world of radio feature reporting. I went up at an ultralight, hung out in a migrant labor camp with a part-time prostitute who dreamed of working in an office and broke my heart. Shocked fish in the Shenandoah River, hunted coons at night, enjoyed the music of a dozen-membered elementary school marching band that featured, as I remember it, 5 triangles. I produced my own pieces. No one edited me. I did what I did, and on the air I went. After a year or so of winning local awards, I won a regional AP award. which I took to mean I had this radio feature thing down. I met NPR's Wendy Kaufman. She's a long-time wonderful reporter who's based in Seattle, or was based in Seattle. I met NPR's Wendy Kaufman at a summer house party in Charlottesville. Somehow the two of us found ourselves out on the back porch, engaged in a high kick contest, being judged by now disgraced National Book Award winner John Casey. I don't remember who won the contest, but I do remember talking to Wendy about NPR, which was only then just emerging as a broadcast force to be reckoned with. Confession time. Back then, I really hadn't the foggiest notion of what National Public Radio was. But this didn't stop me from listening to everything Ms. Kaufman had to say about the power of long format storytelling. Yes, I thought, NPR gets that the relevance of news is not just what happens. It's also how what happens plays out in people's lives. I decided then and there I would freelance for them. It didn't occur to me to start anywhere other than the top. So I phoned up Jay Kernus. In those days, Jay, who's now a producer with CBS Sunday Morning, was the god of national NPR news programming. If I have one other natural talent besides being myself in front of camera, it's phoning people up. My rules for telephone success are: 1, be cheerful and confident rather than timid and beseeching. 2, if you're after something really big, ask for it in stages. And 3, get on and off the phone before the person to whom you're talking begins to wish you'd get off the phone. As to what I wanted, what I wanted was to freelance nationally for NPR. My plan was to use my phone time with Jay Kernus just to ask for a face-to-face meeting. Jay, however, started out by asking me questions about my resume. Since this was still thin as a Kleenex, I quickly realized that asking for a meeting would be too much too fast. So after a short, jolly chat, I asked Jay if I could call him back. Why not? He said. As I said, I can be fun on the phone. I did call him back several times, always getting on and off the phone before we talked long enough to gunk up his schedule. Finally, Jay Kernus and I discovered we both like to rock climb, and I got my meeting. Bring some tape that shows me what you can do, he told me. Confession time again. Just because I'm happy to charge in where others might fear to tread doesn't make me immune to nervousness. So, as was my custom in those days, I medicated my nervousness with all new clothes, down to my underwear. No big lady clothes, mind you, just jeans and a top, magically transformed by newness into emotional armor. The day came for me and my new clothes to drive to Washington and make our pitch to Jay Kernus, the god of NPR news programming. The tape I brought along was a long, where is my place? The tape I brought along was a long, rambling conversation I'd had with an old blues man. It was barely edited and of wavering sound quality. Jay listened to all of it, shook his head, and told me I was a brilliant interviewer, but I still knew nothing about the technical side of radio. Then he told me to go away, learn something about technical radio, and then come back. Certainly, I might have been crushed into going away and never coming back by the second part of Jay's assessment, the "you don't know anything" part. I could have concluded that, like Icarus, I had reached too high and gotten myself melted back down to my appropriate size. Instead, I realized that Jay Kernus was right. I didn't know anything technically about radio. But Jay had also said I had real talent as an interviewer. Might the bit about going away and coming back be his way of telling me if I wanted to play in the big leagues, talent was no longer enough. I had to have professional chops as well. Absolutely, categorically, no exceptions. In other words, I couldn't charm or schmooze or bluff or even talent my way onto the national airways of NPR. I also had to be willing to work really hard. I learned two valuable lessons from Jay Kernus's initial dismissal. One, that professional rejection is always a learning opportunity. And two, and this took a while, that getting better at what I like doing is as satisfying gets. End of snippet 2. Addendum. A year after my meeting with Jay Kernus, I did my first NPR piece, a feature about rock climbing at Seneca Rocks. Essentially, it was about the culture clash between Seneca Rocks climbing visitors and the impoverished West Virginia natives who lived there. Naturally, the West Virginians were happy to take the visitors' money, but all but one of the ones I talked to politely opined that rock climbing those rocks for fun was flat out nuts. The lone dissenter was an old, well-worn farmer who'd spent his whole life scratching a meager living out of the mountains and unhelpful soil around Seneca Rocks. He and I were standing on his back porch, watching a guy in leopard skin tights free climb a vertical rock face at dazzling and reckless speed. We've been silent for a couple of moments when the old farmer folded his arms and said, "You know, a lot of folks around here think people like him are crazy. But what I say, if that's his delight, then God love him for going after it." Amen to that, I say. And that's that. So I'm bowing. Now, anybody have any questions about anything?
You'll have to unmute yourselves.
Huh?
I muted everybody, so unmute yourself if you want to ask Martha questions. This is your chance.
How shy, how awkward.
Martha, how long was your career at WMRA?
What was that a question, Barbara?
How long was your career at?
Oh, I was there. Well, I came in December of '99 and I retired, 3 years ago? So it's the longest I've ever stayed anywhere. And it had to do, I love the work, but I think I stayed at that spot mainly because of my colleagues. And I was spoiled rotten. I did bunches of different things, and everything I did, I loved. And it was wonderfully run, low key but hard driving, professionally place to be. So support public radio. Yes.
Yeah. Do you have in mind an interview that just touched, moved, and inspired you so much that it's staying with you forever?
It happened way back. Well, there's a lot.
I know it's hard to choose. It's hard.
Yeah.
You've interviewed so many people, but I just wondered if there was one. There's probably more than one.
I made mention of one that has always stayed with me when I was listening to things I do before I even heard of NPR, and that was interviewing the woman at the migrant labor camp who supported herself with prostitution and dreamed of becoming a secretary, and that was that I think is when I first went smack up against the power of story. That, you know, that this woman realistically didn't have a prayer, but she was either totally out of touch with reality or she still had hope. And I'm not sure what the difference is. But I still think of that woman and, you know, with a kind of blast of warmth in my heart, or, you know, cheering her on. And I guess the thing, I got to interview quite a few celebrities, but the people who really stuck with me were the people who had of quiet stories. You know, people who live quiet lives, and they tell stories of what it's like to me. How we, you know, life to me is one damn thing after another. And we all stagger forward. And here we are.
Yeah.
And there's something indomitable about that, the quiet perseverance of the human spirit.
Right.
That
Right.
I just want to hug. If that makes sense.
It does, because in my experience too, it's the quiet ones that will just astound you. It's like, wow. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you.
You know, there was another woman. I was in West Virginia, and I think I was freelancing for North Carolina, for Virginia News Network, which used to be, they used to hire me to do like a 50-part series on the Shenandoah Park.
Yeah.
They'd give me a bunch of money and, you know, an expense allowance, and they just knew I'd turn in my features. And I went over, I ended up in West Virginia, in this little, you know, the towns in West Virginia. To me, they're sort of in the they're in the crevice between two mountains, and they're hard to get in and out of. And you know, you're kind
talking to a West Virginia girl, so I can identify.
I loved West Virginia.
I still love West Virginia.
I love it. I love them. And there was these wonderful people in this impoverished town that started a community center. And it was, I went there to talk about the community center, and this young woman, I think she was probably in her late teens, took me aside. And she said, "Are you married?" And I wasn't at the time, so I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Do you pay your own electric?"
Good question.
Said, "Yes, I do." She said, "I have never met a woman who pays her own electric."
That's right.
I just thought, well, I'm glad you met me, because now you know, you don't need.
That was power for her.
Yeah,
that was power for her.
That, in more ways than one.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, speaking of West Virginia, you've got me going on Old Home Week, but possibly this favorite story I did for NPR, there was a writer who was he got his MBA in writing at, not MBA, MFA, in writing at UVA. His name was Brees DJ Pancake.
Okay.
He wrote one book of short stories, and then he shot himself.
Okay.
And that book has never been out of print. And NPR asked me to do a piece. They brought out a special, I don't know, commemorative, fancy schmancy version of this one book of short stories. So I went, my husband, Charlie, he's my photographer and he, my aider and abettor. And we piled in our truck and drove over to Breeze J. I can't remember the town. It was a fairly good sized town, but not a city. And to talk to get a feel for what Breeze DJ Pancake was like.
Yeah.
And we walked into the a little restaurant or something, and I am not shy. I would just started asking people if they knew Breeze J Pancake or knew his family. Got lots of good references, and then I asked this guy, and he said, "Oh heavens, yes, I'm the shithouse mouse." And the shithouse mouse is a character out of this DJ Pancake story.
Oh, that's priceless.
I had this rule that if I am working, I do not turn off my recorder.
Good for you.
The tape that you don't get your good tape answering questions in a Q&A. That's about getting information. It's not about establishing character. So hallelujah, I'm the shithouse mouse. I got that, in the.
I love it.
In the story. So anyway, obviously, if I get rolling, I could go on. But does anybody have any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Your question.
Look, everyone's shy. And you're not usually shy.
Well, we're not used to Zoom,
So Martha, it's Trudy. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Tell us about your most horrible interview. That just went horribly
Oh, the opposite end of the
couldn't
stick.
stand the
Yeah.
person you were interviewing.
Let's hear that one. That'd be good.
Well, after I got into radio, I don't think there was any such thing as a bad interview. I didn't do news. I wasn't after, I would occasionally do news. But what I was after is how people are. So that is, if it's just that person and myself talking, I didn't talk to anybody who didn't want to talk to me. It might take me a while to land an interview, to get an interview with, it's my big bag. I got the only interview with Paul Newman that he did between Color of Money, and then he took like 3 or 4 years off to be a race car driver before his next movie. And I got that interview by, first of all, making friends with the woman who answered the phone at the racing car shop that he and his racing partner had. And then when I got up to Lime Rock Raceway, I made friends with his pit crew. And that just, I'm sitting there and here comes Tall Paul and I get an interview. So, and what was really fun is I was hanging out with this guy, a sports reporter from USA Today there, and I heard him as I got up and rode into the night like the Lone Ranger. My God, she's getting an interview. And it was great because he described NPR as, oh yes, that news organization where people drive home in their Volvo station wagons with their 2.2 children in the back.
Oh gosh.
The radio on to find out what the little people are doing. So as for USA Today, take that. Probably the most difficult, challenging interview I ever had, besides the one where I was being choked, was again back in.
She's teasing us. Come back to that.
Yeah. No, I already said that. The kid was choking me with the. I think I said, or maybe that was before, but anyway, it was Channel 29 made this deal with Fashion Square Mall when it first opened. that I would film my talk show out there, 1 week's worth of talk shows every month. So, set up in the center court there while, screaming babies and, whatever, people gawking. And there I am with my camera people and my guests. Well, I interviewed this one guy, and he showed up just blasted out of his mind.
Oh my.
Drunk as a skunk, which I can relate to, being, being in long-term recovery myself. But it was a long half hour trying to get, because I booked him for the whole half hour, which I didn't usually do, but he was some very unusual guy. So that was not what my bright
That was a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, that
one would be a challenge. Yeah.
But you just keep going.
Yeah.
It's like we're all doing these days. We're just keep going.
Well, there's one of the things with every time I heard you do an interview, it's like that girl is really interested in the people. And it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, they're a fellow human being. And you bring that out with every single interview.
Well, I love, I sort of mean the stories on 2 feet thing. I learned somebody trying to inform me, like I dropped out of college. I went to a boarding school in college in New England, and I dropped out of Mount Holyoke College after 1 year because I was tired of being told about stuff.
Yep.
I wanted to experience stuff. And I learn most. I broaden my range of experience best from listening to other people's stories.
Definitely.
I come from a family of academics, who make their living lecturing, and I don't know how I got there because
it was there. It was always in you.
I don't know. I have always found people's story. I did a show, The Spark, for MRA, and the theory was that you get anybody on this green earth talking about what fascinates them, and that is interesting for the rest of us to listen to.
Yep.
We don't have to know or even necessarily be able, if they're talking about nuclear physics, we don't even necessarily have to follow it, but we relate to their relating to their subject.
Definitely. Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody, anything else? Hi, Kitty.
Here's Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. I was wondering if you were still out there interviewing today. Who in today's news would be your ideal of who you'd like to talk to and find out more about?
Oh man.
She's going to interview you, Sarah. Watch out.
Or woman. I went after my favorite interviews were I used to meet people at gas stations. And I would get assignments. I had the best gig, NPR gig, because I had no desire to live in a big city. I didn't want to be stationed at I wanted to live small market, live in a cow pasture, and work big market. So they developed this gig for me. My focus was publishing and books and publishing. And if I got an assignment, I would of course set up an interview and go after an interview for them. But in most, I would say 75% of the stories that I did other than that were just people I met or heard of.
Mhm.
And there's something about the story or the situation or the way they presented themselves. I just thought, oh, here's a story on 2 feet.
Mhm.
And so that was, in terms of today, I suppose the storyline that interests me most right now is people's attitude towards the future.
Yeah.
Do we look at it fearfully? How do we feel about change? My attitude towards change is it's never not going on. And we're going to live into the next new normal the same way we've lived into new normal before.
Yep.
But I would very much enjoy, I know that there's a lot of fearful people. And I would enjoy hearing the story behind that fear and that dread and that worry and that resistance to change, the story behind it, not, getting told about the fear, but how that fear arrived.
Mhm.
So,
Maybe we need another series, Martha.
yeah.
Well, not just that, but to have a conversation with those who are so fearful of the future, as well as have a conversation with those who are not fearful of the future. They're just the kind of go with the flow folks.
Yep. I
And
think
to
the
have
trick
to bring
is,
in both sides of the story.
I think the trick is too often when we have conversations where we don't agree, we say, you need to do this, or you should think that, or you, whatever, rather than saying, I feel or I think.
Exactly.
And,
Because people want to be validated for how they feel anyway.
and it's much easier to, there again, it's how I feel. You can't argue with that. You can listen to it though.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder as I go out and about the difference in people's attitudes between the mask wearers and the non-mask wearers. When you're out in public, what their philosophies are compared.
Yeah, I'm also interested in. We can. What dare we wade slightly into politics? But I come from a long line of liberal, probably intellectual snobs. And broadcasting for me, getting to talk to people and hear their stories just bounce that right out of me. And I think one of the things we don't have is much tolerance for each other's struggles. That each other's struggles are whether you're struggling with lack of, if you're ignorant, you're struggling with a lack of education,
Mm-hmm.
a lack of knowledge, and it shouldn't be a pejorative. It shouldn't be an accusation. You're so ignorant. We should, I think, be interested in how a person got to be an adult. and remain so ignorant. That's kind of on the rest of us. Is that too gloppy for words?
No, because
Sound.
no, I think that's a good one. And the thing is, you say they're ignorant when it become. I hear you when referencing to it as being illiterate. You, because literacy opens the doors for a lot of people. But people who don't have that kind of education can be some of the wisest people you'll ever know.
I remember the first time I met a truly illiterate, it was a Monacan Indian in
Mm-hmm.
Amherst County,
Mm-hmm.
and Natalie, and he was illiterate,
Mm-hmm.
and I just thought I don't know, he just knew, first of all, he knew a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get it from books, and I think at that time I thought all learning came from books.
No.
All it was written down.
Yeah.
And he was just wise.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
But anyway, and anybody got, I'm yap, and I'm, gee whiz, starved for conversation. So you have to,
Martha, you and I could keep going.
I know.
What about someone else? If you were looking at the camera, do you have a question?
Natalie, you got a question? No?
Have to unmute first. So I just wonder, Martha, what do you do now? Since you've had such a full life with so many different experiences, what excites you now?
Well, I have had I've had a lot of fun. I also had what I call my midlife train wreck. And I'm going to get personal here. I was married twice to two very nice men, and married and divorced twice by the time I was 35. I was, at the same time, I was finding my feet professionally. I was, my main career before then was I co-owned a couple of 3 restaurants in Charlottesville. And that's how it sort of backed into the second ex-husband who told me I could never get a job in television was my restaurant partner. And at the same time, I was beginning to find myself professionally. I was entering my midlife train wreck, which was a combination of my family's riddled with depression, and I'm a lifelong Prozac taker. And I'm a cheerful depressive. I love life, enjoy it a lot, and I have some bad chemicals that I have to deal with in my head. And for a while, I self-medicated that depression, and that resulted in my midlife train wreck. And coming out of the other side of that, I had no money, was dreaming of zooming up to a net worth of 0. I have no idea where all my money went because I was business partners and came out of my divorces with some. And so I got fired as editor of Albemarle Magazine in Charlottesville and went down to Amherst County and got a job as the dinner cook at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, because wow, if there's one thing I could do, it was cook. And that my first day there, I was in the kitchen, and in walked yard man Charlie, who was on the maintenance crew. And I looked at him and I thought, that guy has the kindest eyes. I was so hungry for kindness and kind people. And I said, he is got to be married, happily married, and have 3 kids. Well, it turned out he was unhappily divorced and as messed up as I was. And anyway, that was Charlie is my Mr. Wonderful. We got married a couple of years later, and the wonderful thing about it is that we related to each other's strengths, and we had no patience for each other's nonsense. So what this long rambling personal thing is getting around to, Charlie was the ideal partner for kind of a hard-driven, yeehaw, let's figure out what I want to do next and go do it. He's never had a career. He has jobs. His favorite thing to do is be in the garage, in a big garage, which will never see my car because it's so stuffed with semi-derelict motorcycles. And anyway, with Charlie, I finally came home. I didn't really, my childhood home was fine, lovely in many ways, but it wasn't a trustworthy place. So what I am enjoying doing, I have some health challenges now. And what really, really floats my boat now is time is savoring the fact that somehow this old rock and roller ended up with a safe home. And, you know, I have had so much fun professionally, you wouldn't think I would get that as well. So in terms of what I do with my time, I've I have no hair. Well, I do have hair. How do you like it? I had chemotherapy, which, and so my brain was sort of, I had fry brain for quite a while, and have had, but I've started to write again. I garden, but I don't have any desire to, what's new for me is staying home. That's a new adventure for me.
Me too.
Staying home because I love. So for right now, I'm not saying that'll go on, that'll, you know, that's the last thing. I don't believe in, you know, I just live and, you know, whatever happens, happens. But my goodness, I ramble, but you know, you get the drift.
I got a question for you, Martha.
Yeah.
First, let me tell you that being interviewed by you is a pleasure because you made me feel so comfortable. But in our conversation, at one point you said that you were an introverted extrovert.
Uh-huh.
Why don't you elaborate on that?
All right. I might have said I'm a social introvert. Is that, or I might have said introverted extrovert. But a more accurate way to put it would be a social introvert, because introvert extrovert, the way it was explained to me by my old friend Judith Dilts, who's the one who nailed me as a social introvert. I absolutely adore being with people. I crave good conversation. I crave just hanging out, cooking with people, whatever. But it drains me. What recharges me is what I call staring at the wall time, or writing, or reading, or gardening. So I am socially skilled in that I'm comfortable. I can't remember the last time I was in a situation where I was uncomfortable, unless it was one where somebody was being mean, and that we don't put up with. But can walk in a room full of strangers without a worry. But it's work on some level. So, you know, give me the Glen, give me my backyard in Singer's Glen. And
Hooray for Singer's Glen.
yeah, Singer's Glen, yeah, and I'll rise like the phoenix.
Any other questions? Martha, you want to talk about our next offering?
Oh yes, our next story on 2 feet is going to be it's another. We're going to get out of Singer's Glen, I promise.
Eventually.
But, one of Barbara's and my neighbors, and the third of, we used to call ourselves the 3 witches of Singer's Glen when we were in our organizing the Democrats precincts over here, but we don't call ourselves, we still privately think of ourselves as the 3 witches. Susan was a long time CIA analyst, and she was she wrote the daily briefings for the president, and she was a speechwriter for the head of CIA, and she dealt with, she's the one who got the raw intelligence in and analyzed it. And she
was in counterterrorism, right?
Yeah, counterterrorism. And she was in counterterrorism in the years before 9/11. And she is going to talk about, her story is called 9/11 and COVID-19. And she's going to talk about her personal impressions of the similarities of the politicization of intelligence findings before 9/11. And we all know what that led to. And the politicization of the science of our current pandemic. Because she sees from her experience as a CIA analyst in counterterrorism, she has interesting things to say about that. So
and the Q&A ought to be great.
Yeah, the Q&A should be wonderful.
So that's on June 17th.
Yeah, 2:00.
Right. So we'll do a Facebook announcement and all that, razzmatazz. Hope you guys can join us and that you're interested in that.
Yeah, and tell your friends. Susan's really quite extraordinary. Talking about the run-up to 9/11.
You gotta go. Thank you so much, Martha. This was wonderful.
You guys are great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Fascinating.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great
Thank
stories.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, Martha.